Welcome back to the shop, everyone. Today's video takes place in week 47 of 2022, which is November 21st to November 27th. We are going to start off this video in the engine bay, and we are going to start off doing some test fitting or some installing. So I don't know if you remember a few videos back, but I tried installing a idle air control motor on the throttle body, and it was just not happening. There was no way, no how. As it turns out, I had the wrong size. This is a 105 millimeter throttle body, if I recall correctly, and the one that I had was only good for the 92, the 95, and I think the 102 millimeter. So I reached out to Holley, and I worked with them, and we came up with a solution. I got this new one in, it's on, it fits, the bolt holes are perfect, it's going to be exactly what I need. But right now I'm looking for the second mounting screw, which I lost somewhere. I don't know where it went, but I lost it. So it's time to open some presents. I got some new parts coming in, so I'm going to go through them and just make sure that everything is there and everything is as I expect it. I do like doing these unboxings on camera, because then if there is a problem with any of it, I have evidence. Hey, like, I didn't open the box, drop it on the floor, break it. You know, it was broken when I got it. So those right there are some step down butt splices. So the yellow side on the one is 10 to 12 gauge and the blue is 14 to 16. And then I also have 14 to 16 to 18 to 22. That right there is a Leash Electronics 2 relay module. I have the Leash Electronics 8 relay module in the car, but I got the 2 for my 2 fans that are going to be on my new rad. And here we have some stainless steel socket head cap screws, and that's for the water pump mounting. So those right there are fuel injector connectors. So those are the Bosch EV6 connectors, so I can repin my fuel injector. Got those Sargent crimpers, the small and the medium, so that I can terminate all of my own connectors. Those will do pretty much most of the connectors that I'm going to be working on. And then I got my new Holley, I think that's the J4 harness, and that's for the transmission control. No, sorry, that is J2B, my output harness. So that's what that harness was. Alright, now that we're moved back to the engine, we are going to get back onto some sensor wiring. So I've got a positive and a negative wire kind of grouped together there. I am grouping together all of the positives and negatives, it looks like. And now I am looking up sensor wiring. The reason being is I need to know which sensors need a ground, which sensors need a power, and which don't. So pretty much all the sensors on this car get ground, +5 sensor, and signal output. The exception being the, I believe it's the intake air temperature. The IAT sensor is just a sensor ground and then a signal. Alright, so what I'm doing here, since I have all of the power and the grounds for the sensors run, I'm going to use my brand new step down butt splices and get these wired up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the 16 and 14 gauge on one side and 12-10 on the other, and then I'm going to be able to connect, you know, the 5 or 6 sensor wires all together under one side of the butt splice, and then connect the other to the feed coming from the Holley. Since each of these sets of sensor wires are roughly run to the location. I'm taping them up so that I don't accidentally mix up like a long +5 and a short ground. That wouldn't be fun. I'd have to redo it. So just tape them together just to keep the same length of sensor wires together. So yeah, I just ended up crimping all of those sensor wires together. If I recall correctly, I actually used the red and the blues, the 14, 16, and 18 to 22 on the other side, because those are all 22 gauge sensor wires. So yeah, if I recall correctly, there was the red and blue step down butts places, not the ones that I mentioned before. And what I'm doing right there, I think, is I'm taping the sensor and the ground and the sensor ground wires coming out of the holley, and I'm going to strip them and crimp them onto the rest of the sensor harness. Yeah, that's what I was doing. And this lines up pretty darn well. But before I do those crimps, I'm going to grab some heat shrink, and I'm going to get some heat shrink over the connections. Otherwise, getting heat shrink on there later would be a horrible time. Now with the heat shrink over the wires, I can crimp them down. And let's see here, what are we gonna do here? Probably heat shrink these connections. Yep, so just grab my extension cord, the heat gun, and we are going to shrink that heat shrink. You know, I want to make sure that no water gets in there, since this is going to be in the engine bay. You know, chances are when you're going down the road, some moisture might get in there. And the last thing I want to do is have any of those connections exposed to water. You know, if all of your sensors start going haywire, it's not going to be a good situation. So yeah, with that stuff heat shrink, I'm currently separating out some of the wires, and I believe those are going to be my IAC wires. Or are those some of the sensor wires? It's hard to see the colors here. Let's see, what do we got going on there? No, maybe those are sensor wires. I know my idle air control motor wires are all the purple ones, like purple blue and purple green and purple black and something else. Actually, yeah, that bundle in my hand there, that looks like the IAC wires. So those are all purple. So those must just be sensor wires going to the front? What is that? I should know this. Yeah, that might be the sensor wires going to the front. The coolant temperature, the pressure transducer, the fuel pressure, the oil pressure. Yeah, the fact I'm taping those to the sensor positive and ground wires, that's probably all my sensor wires. Right, those are also my two sensors going to the back, the map and the intake air temperature. I just kind of, I'm going to eventually fold those back, and they're going to run back the way they came and then up to the back of the intake. I think I'm just going to tape each individual sensor output wire to the power wires. Not output, sensor signal wire. I think that's typically what they call it, the signal wire. So for example, on the oil pressure sensor, that would be sending the signal to the gauge. you know, a bit more of the engine bay harness all tied up. So we're grabbing the fuel injector harness, and I'm going to start stripping off all of the stock loom and sheathing on there. I'm not super ecstatic about the work that came from Holley, so my plan is to redo it at some point anyway, so let's just pull it all off and get things to where I need to be. What you saw is I was comparing the new injector connector that I got to the existing one, just to make sure it's the same. Well, it did take quite a bit of time to actually get that all undone. There was a lot of tape and a lot of loom on that harness, but at the end of the day we got it all apart and ready to go for the next phase when I need it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back to taping up this engine harness and getting all the wires where they need to go. So it looks like the wires that I'm grabbing out now are all of the fuel injector wires and the power for the fuel injectors. So just gonna get that all organized. So I want to try and just give you guys a bit of a different angle as I'm feeding some wires in the back of the intake. I just want to kind of show you what that looks like, and you know, show that I got my hands in there, and yeah, just different view. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. Yeah, so here we go. I'm starting to feed the wires through. You know, when I'm on top of the engine, I can't really see what's going on the inside, so I'm just kind of sticking my hand in between the runners and doing what I gotta do and feeling around for it. So yeah, what I just did is I was getting the idle air control wires and the TPS wires over to the side. So I just gotta, you know, reach in there with my fingers and feel around for them until I feel them, and then pull them out. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to look and kind of get a base thought of how I'm gonna run this. Yeah, not too much else going on, just trying to figure out how to route it all. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taping up on the injector harness roughly where I want to cut it, I think. So I just have, yeah, that big chunk of tape there, and that's going to be where I, yeah, cut the harness. So you can kind of see that I folded those two wires back on the bundle itself. And the reason why I did that is because that's the intake air temperature and the manifold absolute pressure or MAP sensor in the back. So I need those sets of wires to come to the back of the intake, whereas the rest go either to the side or to the front. Well, gotta get the instructions out, and the reason why I need the instructions is I need to know which wire on the coolant temperature sensor is what color, so that I can pin these last two connections out on the engine harness. There's going to be one for the pressure in the cooling system and one for the temperature in the cooling system. So that's why I got my instructions out, because it'll tell me which wire is which. And I'm just grabbing the box that has my all my connectors that came with the holley wire, or the holley wiring harness. So just grabbing that box because I needed to figure out where these pins were for the connector, and I ended up throwing them in that box just so they would be with the rest of the connectors that I was using in the engine bay. So I just clipped those 2 wires short, and I'm going to pin them up and get them into the connector. So what I'm going to do is pull out one of the pins from the connector. I had 2 knock sensors in the harness, and I'm pulling one of them out. I don't think I'm going to need 2. If I hook any up, 1 should be more than sufficient. And when I first started trying to pull the pin out, it was still connected, which is just a dumb move. You need to pull it out of the... I'm pretty sure you need to disconnect it before you can pull it out of the harness. So I ended up doing that, just disconnecting it, and then I can pull that wire out. And it's cleanup time. got the shop cleaned up a little bit, we can get back to harness work. So I'm just pulling the harness off right now, and we are going to start getting set up to install the other end of the fuel injector harness on the main engine harness there. So yeah, that's what we're getting ready for. I just grabbed the injector harness connector out of the box, got my crimpers, just getting everything all set up to start doing some wire termination. I'm grabbing my laptop because I need to reference the wiring diagram to know which wire color goes to which injector and make sure that I have all of the pins lined up correctly, because if I'm trying to fire cylinder 1 instead of cylinder 8, I mean, I'm going to be putting fuel into a cylinder while, you know, the piston's coming up and the exhaust valve is open, so it's just not going to be a good time. You got to make sure that all of your stuff is correctly pinned out and connected. With the injector harness wires crimped and connected and all put together, I am going to start pulling off the fuel rails. So I just had these fuel rails on temporarily, just to kind of make sure when I was installing the electrical connection in the firewall that it wasn't in the way, and just kind of get a visual look at it and make sure that, you know, it's clearing valve covers, it's clearing the intake, nothing's really going to get in the way. And so yeah, so now we are going to pull those fuel rails off, and we are going to start installing injectors on the rails. So one thing I did is a bit of research. The injectors are quite stiff going in there. There's a couple of O-rings on the top and the bottom. And so I did a bunch of research just to see, should I be putting oil on them? Should I be putting, you know, like WD-40 on them just to help them in? And there was a lot of conflicting information. Some folks say just throw whatever you want on there, it's not going to hurt anything. Some say that, you know, certain materials on the O-rings will break them down and the rubber is going to disintegrate. So I chose not to do anything at the moment other than just kind of like push them in there. And, you know, if I ever have to pull these out, I'll do some more research. I'll reach out to a few more contacts and just see what they say, if I should be using any sort of lubrication or anything like that. You know, this is my fuel system, so the last thing I want is the O-rings to break and then be spewing fuel everywhere. The last thing I want is a fire in the engine bay, even though I already had one. The last thing I want is an actual gas fire in the engine bay, you know, with it pumping fuel. Now that I have all of the fuel injectors on the rail, I'm just going to start installing them on the intake. And I start with one, I push it on, and then I set the end screw. Oh, look at that. I do use some engine oil. I just dipped my finger in my oil pan and I threw some oil on there to help grease it. So I lied. I didn't put them in there just dry because I think it's because it was just so hard to get this on there. So I got the one side in, and then I used the screw to hold that end down, and then I was able to push, you know, the rest of them in along the way. So everything I said before about all the research I did, I guess I decided using a little bit of engine oil wasn't going to kill me. Doing the same thing on this one, just throwing a little bit of oil on there. All right. You know, this will teach me to, you know, narrate these videos like 7-8 weeks after I actually did the work. It's kind of hard to remember everything that happened. You know, the video helps document it a bit, but yeah, sometimes you just forget. Now that I got the fuel injectors all installed, let's just feed that harness back through the engine. This time I did it a little differently. Instead of coming from the back and feeding all the wires down to the front, I, you know, pushed the connector in through the front to the back and up. I figured it'd probably be easier to push just the one big blob. It actually ended up being a little bit more onerous and harder, so In the future, I'll just feed all the loose wires in from the back, grab them and pull them to the front. Alright, so now that I have all of the fuel injectors installed, I have the fuel injector harness that I did all the crimping on in the engine bay. I can actually start feeding the injector wires back through the intake, through the runners, and onto the injectors. So you can't see what I'm doing on the other side because, like a bit of an idiot, I didn't reposition the camera over onto the other side of the car so you could see what I was doing. But hopefully I don't move the camera onto the other side when I do this side, so you actually get to see this side. On the Ford engine, on the passenger side, the cylinders go 1, 2, 3, 4 from front to back, and then on the driver's side, 5, 6, 7, 8 from front to back. So if we're looking at this, the closest cylinder, or the cylinder at the bottom of our view here is cylinder 8. Cylinder 8 is actually kind of out of view because you can't see the header tube. So that would actually be cylinder 7 at the bottom, and then 6, and then 5 at the front there, or the top left from our screen. So on this fuel injector harness, what's going to happen is cylinders, what is that, 3 and 4, and then 7 and 8 are going to kind of fold back on themselves and then come up into the injectors, and then cylinders 1 and 2 and 5 and 6 kind of run together towards the front and then split off and go up. What I'm trying to do is figure out how to take this connector apart. Ideally, if I could, I would just reuse the pins on the new connectors. But then I pulled my head out of my ass and realized just cut the wires as short as possible. I need to trim this harness down to size anyways, so trying to keep them super... or trying to keep the same pins doesn't really matter because I'm pulling it apart anyways. But what I am making sure I do is I keep the same trigger and power wires together. So that's what I'm doing when I cut. I believe the cylinder label was only on one wire, so when I cut the connector off, I make sure that both wires for the same cylinder end up under the label. That way I'm not mixing them all up. With the first couple of wires bundle, let's try and speak English here. I can kind of put the harness back in the car, and I can start laying out the path for the front 4 cylinders, and they kind of follow the same path and then split off towards the front of the engine. So those right there in the container that I'm getting out are the new EV6 injector plugs and all the pins. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the harness in the car, get all of the wires kind of where I want them coming through from the middle of the intake towards the injectors, and then I'm going to put the harness connector ends on the harness. And so the way this should work is each of the injector wires should come through the middle of the runner and then just kind of do like I guess an M shape, one to each injector. And so you should start seeing what I'm talking about right here. So I'm cutting this a little bit shorter. I'm going to put the end on, I'm going to put all the pins on, I'm going to put the ends on, and then yeah, so this cylinder, or this bank of cylinders, these two cylinders, the two wires that are kind of towards the back of the car right now are going to bend to cylinder, I guess that's what, 8, and then the front two wires are going to bend to cylinder 7. And what I'm doing right here is I'm putting the old injector connectors on just to see which wire goes where, which wire is the positive wire and which wire is the trigger wire. I don't want to get those mixed up, so I'm just using the old ones as a reference. So now that I have cylinder 7 connected, you can see what I was talking about there. Both wires come up through the middle of the runner. One peels off towards the back, one peels off towards the front. The wires are all the same length. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do for all of the cylinders. So that connector right there, I believe, is the connector for what would have been the would come with the TPS connector, maybe, or maybe the fuel inject, or sorry, the pressure transducer, the throttle position sensor, oil pressure, the oil pressure transducer. Those all use the same connector, and on the pinout for the connector, I think it's like ABC, but on the connector itself it's 1, 2, 3. So what I did is I took the old pigtail that came with the pressure transducers that would have come from Holley, and I figured out which connector is which, because I have all of my own connectors that I'm going to wire direct. As I've done with the rest of this car, I'm not using any pigtails that have like a pre-cut length of wire that you would normally splice into. I am creating all my own connectors, so the wire runs start to finish with no splices unless absolutely required. But yeah, so I was just figuring out the ABC to 1, 2, 3 just to make sure that the wires are in the right place, and then I did a little instructional video, a little Holley quick tip, which I will have on the channel at some point in time. So now I'm just going to go through and I'm going to put on the TPS connector, and then I'm going to do the IAC motor connector, get that done. Because the IAC motor has 4 wires going in it, there's a IAC A high and low, and then IAC B high and low. I need to make sure that I put the right pin in the right position on the connector. So I'm actually going through the Holley documentation right here, and I am figuring out exactly which pin goes where in that connector. know, the wires that I'm doing right now, that's for the fuel pressure transducer, which is just sitting kind of at the end of the fuel rail. So yeah, 3 wires on there: sensor ground, sensor +5, and then signal. And that Holley quick tip that I did is what tells me which wire goes where in that connector. Yeah, if you're new to the shop and you didn't know I have dogs, the hair on the arm of my sweater should tell you that I have quite a few dogs. So, yeah, I don't think there's going to be much times where I'm wearing a hoodie and it's not covered in hair, because getting it all off is just too much work. So, as I mentioned, I think in one of the previous videos, the water pump bolts are what's currently holding the engine in the car, because those bolts go through the engine plate and then into the block. So the bolts that came with the water pump were a little on the short side, because that's a 1/4 inch engine plate. So what I'm going to do right now is just go through and replace some of the hardware with slightly longer bolts. And I'm going to do that just to make myself feel better about everything in the car. I know it wasn't going anywhere, but I just like that extra little bit of peace of mind. So now that I got some of that hardware replaced, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start mounting the AC brackets onto the car. Now, this AC bracket wasn't designed with the Mazira water pump in mind. So what I have to do is I have to knock out a bit of the bracket, and that's because the dimensions on the water pump are a little bit different. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I've just roughly marked it out, and I'm going to grind and cut and just take a little chunk out of there and get it to clear. actually thought for a second here, and I got you guys a decent angle to see what I'm looking at here. And you can see the white paint pen was where I was originally pulling out of that bracket, and that was a really good shot before my hand was in the way. But it was a really good shot to see what I was clearancing around on the water pump. There was just a little piece protruding out. So yeah, that's what I needed to clearance. And obviously I always like to cut a little bit short and then go back and cut more later. So that's what I did. So now I'm just making, you know, a couple more marks, and I'm going to cut some more. And speaking of dogs, here's Carburetor. And here you guys have a fantastic camera angle of that one bolt hole that I'm not even working on. Sorry, not sorry. Man, if you thought the camera angle was bad before, I just let you guys look at nothing that I'm even working on right now. Hey, there we go. That's a little bit better. That's a lot better. You can actually see what I'm working on. All right, so in order to get that bracket on, I gotta pull the mounting bolts out. Fortunately, I know that I have enough other bolts holding the engine up that I'm not worried about pulling these four out. They're coming out easy enough. It's not like while I was pulling them out I was really fighting with them, so I definitely didn't see any problem pulling these four out. And yeah, it's a good thing that I replaced the hardware with longer bolts earlier, because those probably wouldn't have gone in with the original bolts. All right, some of the accessories on the engine are starting to take shape. I really want to have AC in the car, so this has to work. I don't want to make the decision later on to be like, oh, you know what, I'm not going to do AC after all. I have to make it work. That is a goal. I'm gonna do it. So now that I have the AC bracket on, I need to try and figure out how some of the other accessories are going to mount. And one of the big ones is going to be power steering. I still want to do power steering. I want power brakes. I want this to be a nice, good, easy street car to drive. I don't want anything manual or harder than it needs to be. So part of that is, figuring this stuff out. When I originally got the car, the power steering pump was mounted relatively high up on the engine block. So I need to figure all of this out. That would have bolted into the head. So what we're going to do because I need to figure out where the AC is going to go, I'm going to get the procharger bracket out, and we're going to loosely fit that onto the car, just to give us an idea as to the space that I'm working with and where the power steering pump may end up going. So for this mock-up, I'm not using any of the hardware that came with the procharger. I'm just using, you know, nuts and bolts that I got in the bin just to make it work, because I don't really know which bolts go where yet. So I just want this kind of mocked into place, and that's it. So with that mocked in, I roughly know where the air conditioning compressor is going to go. I roughly know where the procharger is going to go. So just trying to figure out where the power steering pump is going to go. And of course, it's still leaking power steering fluid. I've had that thing off the car and on the bench and on the floor for like weeks, and it's still, every time I go and grab it, it still leaks out more fluid. It's almost like the power steering reservoir just like magically, you know, builds up or creates fluid in itself and then just dumps it out every time I move it. So that right there in my hand is the procharger tensioner. So the procharger has a belt. The belt attaches or goes to the crank, and that's just going to tension the belt. So I'm trying to figure out how that fits into this puzzle as well. So I'm actually reading the procharger instruction manual over on the far tray there. Yeah, and now I'm going to just, I just want to loosely fit the procharger in there just to kind of get some understanding of where everything's going to go. And I run into a problem. There is no way that the procharger is going to be installed with the pulley on because the tube front end is in the way. So what I got to do is I stupidly grabbed a socket to try and get that pulley bolt out, but that was never going to work. So I take my air impact and I pull the bolt out of the pulley so that I can put the head unit onto the bracket. And so I run into my next problem, which you can see here. The outlet for the procharger is hitting the engine plate. So yeah, that was fun to realize. So essentially nothing about the procharger, the Team Z engine plate, or the Team Z front end is going to work as they sit. So yeah, I need to figure out a path forward, and that's custom cars. Just because you buy parts for your car doesn't mean they're going to work with other parts. You know, if I had the procharger without air conditioning, the front end would work. The engine plate would possibly still be in the way, but I'd be able to clock the output, so I wouldn't be as concerned. But since I want the AC, it pushes the procharger more to the outside of the car, and because of that, the tube front end is in the way. So since all of that is kind of stopped and blocked until I figure out a path forward, well, actually, I found a path forward. I chatted with a guy I know who built race cars, and he told me instead of having engine plates that sit between the water pump and the timing cover, I should build engine plates that mount from the head, from the front of the head down to the tube frame. So cardboard's out, it's template time. We are templating. And what I'm doing right now is I am getting the rough shape between the head and the front end. I'm just figuring out all the places where it's going to hit and all the modifications I need to make. You've seen me do templates and stuff a ton. I don't think I need to walk through each and every little step yet again. So it's starting to not look so bad. It's starting to look like what I want. It's going to mount onto the face of the head and just go straight down to the bar. So right now I'm just putting some bolt holes in it. So I'm just roughing the bolt holes in, but seems to be working all right. yeah, so I'm just tape that on the head just to kind of get a feel for it, get a good look at it, to see what it's going to be, make some trims and some adjustments. There's a few, like curves around the timing chain that I got to make sure that I'm around. So just doing a little bit of tweaking on the design there. With the original engine plate on the car, it's almost impossible to get measurements on any of the head bolts. So this is the alternator bracket that uses, I believe, all three of the head bolt locations. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking the measurements off of the brackets, and then I can translate that onto my CAD drawing and have a reasonably accurate representation of where the bolt holes are supposed to be. So after several hours designing up the first engine plate on the computer, I printed it out, and mainly what I'm trying to get here is figuring out that the bolt holes are correct, and I may actually not even have the entire engine plate designed up here. I may have just been working on the spacing for the head holes. From my rough or from my first design, I think I was off a little bit, so here I am, second attempt. I'm not great at this stuff yet. I wish I was better. I'll get there with time, but it takes me a few attempts to get it. So yeah, so there I've got all three bolt holes. I cut it out, dropped the bolt holes in, and it kind of just sat in place. And now I'm just going to test it on the head itself just to make sure that things kind of line up as I expect they will. I mean, to me, everything seemed quite reasonable, although paper is pretty flexible and malleable. But for a start, it seemed pretty good to me. So after more hours designing on my computer, which obviously I did off camera, I was able to print out my first design on vinyl, and I'm just transferring that over to cardboard. I do have a vinyl cutter, which is super helpful for some of this stuff, and yeah. What I'm doing right here is using a gasket punch set in order to knock out the bolt holes. The reason why I'm doing that is it's piece of metal, it's sharp, you hit it with the hammer and it makes a pretty much perfect circle. It's an old set, so may not be as sharp as it should be, and we're also cutting through pretty thick cardboard. As you can see on the ground there's a ton of paper, a ton of cardboard. It took a fair amount to make these templates, but that's what you got to do. Yeah, I can't lie. I am really happy with how that turned out. You know, so happy I had to take some pictures and put that on Instagram. Well, that is it for this week in the shop. So, as always, if you have stuck around this long, I would like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.